So the solution to the problem that many people have of self-forgetfulness, or self-unknowingness really, and then when they have an awareness or some knowledge of what they are, they forget and revert back to small provincial viewpoints and modes of behavior. But the permanent solution to self-forgetfulness, and I refer to the self here with an uppercase S, meaning the essence of being, the permanent solution is self-realization. Realization, if you go to the dictionary, you'll see, is defined as experience and knowledge of something. That's simple enough, isn't it? So self-realization is actual experience and accurate knowledge of your essence of being, what you are. That is realization. Not just a pleasant meditative sensation, good feeling of peace or happiness or love or joy or tranquility, but actual experience and knowledge of your essence as it is. That is self-realization. And actual experience and accurate, comprehensive knowledge of ultimate reality is what we call God realization. We use the word God here in the West, but the word God, I did some research recently and looking for the source of the word God, the origin of the actual word God that we use here in our English language usage. And apparently it emerged around the 6th century. So the original scriptures of the Old Testament, so-called Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, it doesn't use the word God. And the original scriptures, the New Testament versions of the Gospels and Aramaic and mostly Greek, they don't use the word God. And of course, in the Hindu scriptures and Buddhist scriptures and scriptures of other cultures, you don't find the word God, because the word God wasn't invented until about the 6th century. But we use the word God, and it's sort of derived from Old German, but we use the word God. But as well to understand in your mind what you mean when you use the word. And, I've, in years past, have spoken at many unity and religious science churches and independent New Thought churches and gone to their conferences and participated in their programs. And at some of the New Thought gatherings, it's common to hear people say, oh, God is love. Now, that certainly is not an all-comprehensive word. I mean, what do you mean by that? Or God is peace, or God is joy, or God is life. This is not... These are not accurate definitions of what this reality is. So when we use the word God, I think it's well for us to know what we're talking about, and to be able to at least put in words what we know, or at least what we think we know. So I think it's well for to us to define the words that we use. But we use the word God, and I use it to mean that ultimate reality, which alone exists, alone which is real, which we are units. Really, we are units of the pure essence of that ultimate reality. So it's, of course, the question comes: if we are units of the pure essence of ultimate reality, and at the core, at the deepest level of being, we are pure and whole and knowledgeable. Why is it that we don't consciously know this? It's because our knowing is obscured. If we don't know it, our knowing is obscured temporarily, thankfully only temporarily. And the primary problem, according to yogis, and I'm sure mystics of other traditions, primary problem is mistaken perception of self-identity. We mistakenly presume that we are independent units of awareness, separate from a larger reality, confined and small, limited, and so on. And so this is called the primary, or first, or original, in sequence of arrows of the intellect. So, if you ask the average person, "Who are you?" they may attempt to give you a description of their personality characteristics, or identify themselves by name, or ethnic background, or family relationships, and so on. Or you may say, "Well, what are you?" And then they may go a little more deeply and give you some psychological definition. But really, what we are is pure consciousness. That's what we are. We are pure consciousness. And realizing or experiencing and knowing this is what we call self-realization. Ramana Maharshi, who is considered to be a great saint of the last century in India, who lived in South India, and never traveled away from where he lived for decades, I was asked on one occasion by a visitor, "Is self-realization possible?" He said, "Yes." He said, "How is it possible?" He said, "It's really very easy. All you have to do is be still." Now, yogis would understand what he was saying. He was talking about complete stillness, stillness even of the mind, while staying conscious. When there is complete stillness, when the mind is quiet, the thoughts stop, and the impulses that arise from the unconscious that activate thoughts and emotions and cause wave-like movements or disturbance in our field of awareness, when they stop, and there is absolute stillness, and we are conscious, then we are self-knowing, self-realized. It is not an attainment or an accomplishment, it is simply there. We are there. It is a revelation, a direct perception or experience of that which was formerly not known or perceived. But it has always been there. At the innermost core of our being, it is always what it is, pure and whole. It is there. So that's why absolute stillness, conscious stillness, enables us to be self-knowing. So that's why earlier when we were meditating, I recommended first having the idea of abiding in this awareness of being, or if attention was inclined to become involved with other matters, memories, sensations, thought processes, and so forth, to at least hang on to something, and the most obvious nearest thing that you can hang on to is your breath. You breathe. So you watch the breath. And then when the breathing becomes very slow, very refined, notice how your thoughts become very refined, and your attention becomes more focused, easily so. And then look for those spaces that occur, usually when you're not breathing, those spaces which occur between streams of thoughts, and then you can recognize those occasions of thought-free awareness, which is proof that you can be aware without thinking, consciously so. And then when you become familiar with that, then with practice you can assume that experience of being at will. You can, when you sit to meditate, you can just be there quickly, just right now. Or during the day, when you notice that you're becoming too outwardly involved, or not comfortable, or too reactive to situations that are occurring, you can just pause and just for a moment and be still, and you can be there. You can be there immediately. So it's a matter of self-training. Spiritual mastership is a matter of mastering states of consciousness. And if we have the will to do it, we can do it. That's the important thing. I learned this I always knew this to be true when I was young, but also this is reinforced, and I was reminded by Paramahansa Yogananda. I was reinforced by being with him, and reminded verbally by him and also by observing him, that it is possible to master your states of consciousness, your mental states, your emotions, and your states of consciousness. So it's important to know that I can be in control of my states of consciousness. Now, at times we may feel a little helpless or hopeless or out of control, but it's not a good idea to affirm that and talk about it to others. Just whenever that happens, get inside. Get a hold of yourself, get a hold of your essence, and be there. And with practice, you're going to learn to do it. But I mentioned the primary cause of misidentification of our essence is this error of the intellect. And then we identify with our small, confined sense of self-identity. But also, there is a problem of being identified with or distracted by the various modifying influences that act on the mind and awareness. And in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, those of you who've read my book, The Science of Self-Realization, will know what I'm talking about. But I'll try to explain it as we go. The modifying influences are several, but one, ordinary thoughts, ideas and concepts and notions that are valid. That is, they are realistic in the mind that we use for reasoning and thinking. When they are restless or not regulated, then our awareness tends to be fragmented. Our awareness may even be somewhat blurred. So we have to learn to have orderly thought processes so that we can think rationally. And when we meditate, we want to be able to quiet those thoughts. We're going to have access to them and use them after meditation. We don't want to banish them, but we want them to be still when we're meditating. But if they just run restlessly and are disorganized, even when we're not meditating, then that makes it difficult to think rationally and to function effectively. All right. So those ordinary thoughts and notions which we have, which are useful to have when we're meditating, we want them to be quiet while we are meditating. And then another modifying influence that weakens and causes conflicts in the mind are the erroneous or false or wrong ideas, concepts, and notions that we have and entertain. The beliefs and opinions that we have that are not accurate, but still we carry them with us in our mind, and we try to think rationally, and we can't. We draw wrong conclusions, if we draw any conclusions at all, because we don't have accurate information. So these are problems. So we want to have accurate information and get rid of all of the erroneous ideas and notions. So that's useful. Also, another modifying influence are the illusions that we might have. And illusions are misperceptions. You think you know something, but you don't. You examine maybe your thoughts or a concept, philosophical concept, or anything, even inside or outside. And if you don't completely comprehend it and understand it, but you think you do, then that's a mistaken perception. You don't have it. You don't have the truth. You think you do, but you don't. That's an illusion. And they're just as troublesome as delusions or erroneous or false notions and concepts. So you don't want to have any faulty perceptions. You want to learn to perceive with accuracy. Whatever you examine, comprehend it. And if you can, that's important. All right. Another modifying influence that, on the minds of and consciousness of many people is fantasy, uncontrolled imagination, a fantasy. So we don't want to fantasize. So it's all right to explore possibilities when we're exercising our imagination for creative purposes, but you don't want to live in fantasy. And you don't want to believe things that aren't true. And you don't want to produce an imaginary mental world and try to live in it. You don't want to do that. You want to be realistic. So you don't want fantasies to modify your mind and your awareness. And another modifying influence, but it's one that we have to deal with, is sleep. Everyone sleeps, so you need adequate sleep. There may be people who are so super conscious that they don't need to sleep. I don't know, but most people need to have so many hours of sleep a day. Better to have it on a regular schedule too. None of this staying up until after midnight because you just like to. Or that's when you feel creative. You also get a little strange after midnight usually too. But anyway, it's better to have regular hours. According to Ayurvedic theory, you ought to be in bed sleeping before 10 o'clock at night, because that's when nature goes to sleep. So cooperate with nature's processes according to Ayurveda. But I recommend going to sleep a little before that, so that you have adequate rest during the night, so you can get up early enough in the morning to meditate. Some folks say, "Oh, I just can't meditate in the morning. I'm not together enough. My head is a little thick. I just can't concentrate." Well, all it takes, my experience is that all it takes is discipline and training and practice. And if you go to bed early enough and get your sleep and get up early in the morning, you can do it, and you enjoy doing it. It becomes enjoyable. You look forward to it. And when you look forward to doing something, you're probably going to do it more efficiently. So when you have your early morning meditation, you want to be at that place where you anticipate it. You're looking forward to it. But to do that, you have to have adequate sleep. So go to sleep at night early enough so you can sleep restfully, and then get up early in the morning and then meditate. You can do that with practice. But have regular hours when possible. Now and then, if you travel extensively, your daily schedule is going to be changed somewhat. But for the most part, unless you're traveling and you don't have any emergencies, try to have a regular pattern to your life. Live holistically. Get up at the same time, meditate, do your work, make sure you exercise also, choose a healthy diet, and in the evening, relax, slow down, withdraw, read a little bit, nourish the mind with positive ideas, meditate a little more if you want to, go to sleep early enough to get restful sleep, and see how much better you feel. As a result, you'll be healthier. Recent studies, according to what I have read, recent studies in relationship to sleep patterns and practices indicate that people who are sleep deprived run the risk of having more health problems and perhaps even earlier physical demise. Diabetes and heart conditions and strokes have been related to sleep deprivation. And we know that the sleep deprivation is related to being accident prone, and less efficiency when you're working, work performance, um, a reduction of power of memory, and so on. So you want to get enough sleep to feel energetic when you wake up in the morning and feel good. That's important. But then you sleep when you go into when you go unconscious when you sleep. There's still a part of you that is aware, because after deep unconscious sleep, when you come to the surface, don't you say, gee, I had a good sleep. You may not have memory of being unconscious, but you do have some awareness that it was very pleasant and restful to be at that deep, thought-free level of sleep. Then at the level of dreams, of course, your mind is processing memories, and we're getting things reorganized. So everyone dreams, even people who say they don't. Everyone dreams. And during dreams, of course, there is rapid eye movement, which is an indicator of dream episodes occurring. But and with practice, if you want to play with dreams a little bit, you can learn to be somewhat conscious during dreams. Most people have, at one time or another, had the experience of being conscious during a dream, where suddenly they were aware, well, I'm dreaming, and then they just watch what happens, or they choose to wake up, but they are aware that they are dreaming, and that's an interesting experience. Useful, it can be useful to have, but another modifying influence that keeps us confined is the unconscious or conscious, choiceful preference to be ordinary. There are some people who say, oh, I want to know God, I want to be self-knowing and be more spiritually aware, but I also want to be like my friends, and I want to be a normal human being. In other words, I want to be ordinary. I want to be self-realized, but I want to be ordinary too. I don't want to be too different. I don't want things to change too much. I don't want to have to change too much, but I would like to be have more understanding, a better understanding of a relationship of the infinite, and be more free, be more freely functional, and so on. But I really don't want to change that much. So, or folks will sometimes say, oh yes, I want to be self-realized. I want to be God-realized. I want to be enlightened in this incarnation. And then we say, all right, do you meditate every day? Well, no, I just can't. Or I'm too busy. Or my mind is too restless. Well, do you read the basic philosophical literature? Do you examine these basic philosophical concepts and try to comprehend them? No, I was never very good at that. And you find out that they don't want what they say they want. They don't want to be enlightened. They don't want to be spiritually awake. They don't want to be freely functional. They want to be just like they are. They're just playing around with it. They're pretending to be on a spiritual path, but they're not on a spiritual path at all. They're just goofing off. And so that's human nature. But we're called, if we are called to be awake, we are called to be awakened from that human conscious level. We function through a human body provided by our parents, but we are more than human. Our essence is spiritual. And so we want to outgrow, transcend all of the limitations of ordinary modified human consciousness. That's the idea. And that's the fun of it, too. If you can consider doing this fun or enjoyable, then it'll always be interesting. You'll always have something to look forward to. You'll never be bored. You'll never be apathetic. You'll always, because it's always the possibility of new discovery right around the corner, any moment. It's there. The possibility is there. Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, life can be fun. Oh, if you know God, meaning if you have a relationship with the infinite and you comprehend this relationship and you comprehend higher realities, that's what he meant. If you know, when you know God, life can be fun. And when you don't know God, life can be anything but fun. So life can be enjoyable, but not by grasping at it and wallowing in the senses and going hysterical and going to the rock concerts and going crazy and using drugs and so forth, or going to the football games and carrying on. Although it's hard to go to a football game now and then if you want to, I guess, or a baseball game, so forth. But I'm talking about this constant outgoing, emotionally charged, stimulating situation that people choose to be in. This is not spiritually wholesome, even psychologically healthy. But to discover how the universe works, to me, is interesting. How were the worlds produced? How are the universes produced? How were we individualized? And how do we relate to our mind and to our intellect? What are the principles or the laws of cause and effect? We know the physical laws of cause and effect. If we don't know them, we can learn them by getting good source material. But there are also spiritual and mental laws of cause and effect. One of the mental laws or principles of causation is that your modes of thinking, your mental states, your mental attitude, your expectations, your desires, your imaginings produce and attract events and circumstances. And with practice, you can actually observe how this works in your life. When things start happening to you or in your experience, with practice, you can see a connection between your prior mental states and expectations, beliefs, mental attitudes, feelings, and so forth, imaginings. You can see a relationship between what's in here and what's happening out here. And when you see that relationship, then when stuff out here starts to be like you don't want it to be because it's not pleasant or comfortable or life-enhancing, if it's troublesome or threatening, you can say, instead of being all upset about it, you can say, all I got to do is change what's up here. And you change what's up here, you may have to change some of your behaviors or actions and make some choices. You may do that, but mainly you change it up here. You change your expectations. You change your states of how you think, and so on. And when you make these changes, then you see changes out here. I can remember when I was 64 years ago, this next month, in December, when I hitchhiked from Florida to California to go to Self-Realization Fellowship to meet Paramahansa Yogananda. I left Tampa, Florida, with $5 and a suitcase in one hand and a little brown duffel bag in the other, and stood out by the side of the road like this. And the first day, I stood there all day and nothing happened, and I slept in an orange grove that night, just off the road. The next morning, I got a ride all the way to Defuniak Springs, Tallahassee and Defuniak Springs, Florida, and the next day all the way to New Orleans, the next day all the way to Fort Worth, and Houston, rather. Houston, I remember it was Houston because Sunday, it was a Sunday because a fellow who was had given me a ride had the car radio on, and they were talking about the impending football game where he was going in Houston. And from there on through the middle of Texas, and then El Paso, and Tucson, and Riverside, and finally Los Angeles. Made it in 7 days. And it was fun. It was enjoyable. I don't recommend hitchhiking today, of course. But back in 1949, it was fun. I was only 18, and the first time away from home, being a farm boy, and it was all a new, big adventure. But I remembered, on that trip, I remembered the story in the autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda's book, of two penniless boys in Vrindavan. You remember that chapter? Where Yogananda, as a boy, and one of his boyhood friends went to Vrindavan, and they were, he had a bet with one of his brothers. One of his brothers said, you can't go penniless and be provided for. You talk about faith, you talk about God providing. He said, here, let's have a wager. So sent him off to Vrindavan. They arrived there at the train station, and there was people there at the train station who had come to meet some friends who were scheduled to arrive, who didn't arrive on the train, and the people that were there thought, we have this big banquet prepared at our house for these friends who are coming on the train, and they're not here. So, boys, would you like to have food with us? So they had this, not only a little lunch, but a big banquet. And they went to the temple, and they were cared for by the temple priest, and so on. And then they went to the train station late at night to head back, and someone came forward and offered to buy their tickets. So everything was provided. So I thought, well, the universe provides. Well, I always knew that when I was little. I knew the universe provided. Even when I was a little child, I was aware of what I felt to be a benevolent presence all around me. And through me, I had that awareness. I never talked about it to anyone. Sometimes there are some things you don't want to talk about to ordinary people. But anyway, so I had this idea. Hey, I'm not alone in the universe. The universe is my friend. I'm provided for. I'm supported by the universe. I had these marvelous long-distance rides. I'd get a ride in the morning that'd take me 400 miles. And it was marvelous. And every now and then they thought I was, they'd say, hey, we're going to stop for lunch. Can we buy you a sandwich? Well, gee, thank you very much. I never begged, you never asked for anything. Everything was just provided. So it was marvelous. And I got to Los Angeles and went to the library, Los Angeles Public Library, which I read recently, a few months ago, burned. But I went to this magnificent library, a huge room filled with books on philosophy and religion and metaphysical themes. And I found a back issue of Self-Position magazine, and I wanted to find the address of the headquarters out of Highland Park District. And so that night at 5 o'clock, I didn't feel like I was ready to go there yet. And I didn't know what quite to do. And I went out, it was getting dark, it was December, and I went out on the sidewalk outside the library, and somebody came along and recognized, I guess, me with my suitcase, recognized I was on the road, and said, young man, where are you staying tonight? And I said, I don't know yet. He said, well, you come with me. So I stayed at the 5th Street Mission. 3 or 4 blocks down the street, there was the 5th Street Mission. And there, you get a shower and a hot meal and a clean bed. So that's where I spent the first night in Los Angeles. And the next afternoon, I was at the library again, and about 4 o'clock, 4:30, I thought, well, it's time to go to Self-Position Fellowship. So I went out on the street, where there was a streetcar track, and I went into a liquor store right on the corner. It was the only store there. And I wasn't going to commune with the spirits. I just went in to ask directions. And I said, how far to this address? And I showed him the address out at Highland Park. He said, 7 miles that way. And I said, thank you, and I headed out. And I had gotten maybe 20 feet down the street, and he said, hey, son. He said, oh, why don't you take the streetcar? He said, don't you have any money? And I said, no. He said, well, here, you can't walk 7 miles. And he gave me a dime. That was a streetcar fare at that time. So I went out to where I was told to get off the streetcar at Marmion Way in Figueroa. See, I still know where it is. And got off the streetcar and started walking up this street up to the top of Mount Washington, about a mile or two away. I had gotten maybe 20 steps up the sidewalk, and a car pulled over. Where are you going, young man? I said, I'm going to the Self-Realization Fellowship, and at the top of the Mount Washington. He said, I'm going right by there. I'll drop you off at the gate. I had cab service, limousine service, right to the front gate. God, it was marvelous. And 6 o'clock, too. That was marvelous because it was supper time. And so I knocked on the door of a little building at the entranceway, which is now a bookstore at that location, but there was a cottage there at that time. And a man about 60 years old, a resident, answered the door, and I told him I had just arrived. And he said, "Oh well," he said, "I'll take you over to the men's kitchen, and you can have supper with the boys." So took me over, and it was supper time, and I was invited to have a light vegetarian supper, which I did. And then Donald Walters, later known as Kriyananda, Swami Kriyananda, Donald Walters, who was then sort of supervised the monks' activities, took me upstairs to the ground level of the building to interview me, to find out who are you, what are you doing here, what can we do for you, and so on. And while we were talking, I heard this rumbling noise in the background, like a motor running. And it was a motor running. And he said, "Oh, Master's coming." And he got up out of his chair, and he heard what sound was the elevator coming down from upstairs. So we went over toward the elevator, and the door opened, and Yogananda came out, dressed to go out. He had his overcoat on and his hat, felt hat, and Sister Dayamata, that woman whose picture's on the wall over there, when she was younger then. She was only 35 at that time. She was about 90 there. But she was about 35. She and her sister, and they were Yogananda's confidential secretaries, and her sister was the driver. She always drove the car. They were with him. And he saw me, and he walked over, and he shook my hand, and very gently, and he asked, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm 18, sir." And he said, "Do your parents know you're here?" He was just checking that out, Didn't want any runaway boys. And I told him it was all right. He said, "All right, I'll see you again." And he went out to the car, and they left. Next day was all-day meditation, 6-hour meditation, really. And then the next day was Christmas Day, Sunday, and Yogananda talked at the Hollywood Self-Realization Fellowship Temple. It was called the Church of All Religions at that time. And after the church service, Myrnalini, who is now the president, she's my age, Dayamata passed 2 years ago. Myrnalini came out on the lawn where I was with some of the fellows, and approached me and said, "Oh, Master will see you at 5 o'clock approximately, after he's seen everybody else this afternoon," because he had appointments with people in the afternoon. So around 5 o'clock, she came out and told me that I could go in. So I went in, and I spent about 20 minutes with him. And I asked to be his disciple, and he asked 2 or 3 questions of me, asked about my health and so on. Then he gave me advice on how to fit into the routine with the fellows, how often to meditate, to read his books for the first year, and his other writings for the first year. And that was it. And everything worked out. Everything like it was scripted. Like I had an appointment. Everything worked. So it was marvelous to have that experience of, I'm intentional. I'm on purpose. I'm called. I'm in tune with the infinite. I'm supported by the processes of life, and everything happened beautifully. Just lovely. So I can testify that it's true, that it works. If you go along with it, you can find your right place. If you're in the right place in the universe is supportive. Events occur, circumstances emerge, people show up, resources are there. Everything that you need to live freely and enjoyably is provided. Of course, we have to make the right choices too, you know. We have to have, to be able to, have to act, be willing to act and know how to act when the time comes for us to act. You know, we just can't sit passively all the time. But so at the end of that first interview with Master, his parting words, his final words were, after giving me those basic guidelines, his final words were, read a little, meaning of his books, read a little, meditate more, think of God all the time. I mean, that's good practical advice, isn't it? Read a little of the right stuff, meditate more, think of God all the time. That's it. And the last instruction he gave me was about 3 weeks before he passed. And he passed in 1952, March 7. That was 2 days before my birthday. But 3 weeks before that, or approximately, I visited him at his desert retreat in 29 Palms. He had a small house where he had lived most of the time, the last 3 years or so of his earth life, where he finished his writings and saw a few disciples and so on. But I visited him. It was evening. It was cold. The high desert gets cold at night, and especially in February. And so we were inside in the living room of his house. And we were together about an hour or so. And he just talked randomly about God and some saints and some experiences of his that he had had with his guru, Shri Yukteswar. And then right at the very end, when it was time for me to go, his last instruction was this. He said, don't allow your mind to be troubled by what others do or don't do. And don't look back. And don't look to the left or to the right, but look straight ahead to the goal, meaning self-realization. I knew that. Look straight ahead to the goal and go all the way in this incarnation, and you can do it. That's how he talked to me. So that was the last advice he gave me. And I didn't see him after that. I had to return to Phoenix. He sent me to Phoenix about 2 months after I met him in Los Angeles. They had a branch center in Phoenix, and he sent me over there with instructions to come back to see him every 60 days. So I did that for the next 2 years and a little more. Every 60 days I went back to Los Angeles or to his house out at the desert and spent a few days wherever he was, and always saw him privately on those visits. So I had the opportunity, to have that private interaction with him, to be in his presence and have his support. And then I had plenty of opportunity to practice what I knew I should do. Being in a monastic setting, I spent most of my time alone. I had no social life at all. Meditated long and deep every day. And did this for almost 4 years, and it was very enjoyable. I recommend it for everyone. I think every young person should have at least 3 or 4 years of seclusion in the right setting, in the right environment, with the right supervision and support. I think it would be very beneficial. and be a good start for everyone. But if you didn't have it when you were young, you can have it now. You know, you can make your own home now, your apartment, your home, your abode. You can make that your private monastery, or your room where you meditate can be your cave. You know, you remember the story in Autobiography of a Yogi, where Master, shortly after he met Sri Yukteswar. See, when Master was a boy, you read his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. You know, as a boy, several times he tried to go away to the Himalayas and find a cave and meditate. That was his idea. He was not successful. And shortly after he met Sri Yukteswar, he asked Sri Yukteswar for permission to go to the Himalayas and meditate in seclusion. And Yukteswar didn't say no. All he said was, I don't think you'll find God in the mountains. But since he didn't say no, he took off. And he was misdirected several times, and he finally ended up in some village, and he met fortuitously a disciple of Lyra Mashaya who lived there in seclusion, who took him in for the night, talked with him, and found out that he wanted to go to the Himalayas and meditate in seclusion. And then he said, this person said to his yogi said to him, do you have a room back at your guru's ashram where you can shut the door and be alone? Yes, that'll be your cave. Go back to your guru. So he did. He went back. He went back to Sri Yukteswar. And Sri Yukteswar, you know from reading the book, he was a very compassionate person, but he was a strong disciplinarian. And so when Yogananda returned, he apologized for being so impulsive. And he said, sir, I know I must have disappointed you. Yukteswar said, no. He said, I have no expectations. Gee, thanks a lot. You didn't miss me a little bit, you know. No, I had no expectations, you know. But then a few days later, Yukteswar assisted him to have his first experience of what he called cosmic consciousness. But anyway, so right where we are, you know, in our present environment, most of the time we can arrange conditions so that we can read inspirational, informative material. We can meditate, we can be still, have private time. And it's useful when you can to get away from your home environment and come here or to any quiet place. There are other quiet places than here, I'm sure, that are conducive to being alone and spiritually supported, you know. But sometimes it can be useful to withdraw temporarily from the stuff that's in your environment, the telephone and the people you know ordinarily, and the responsibilities that you have and the duties you have, just to get away from it and just forget it. Don't even think about it while you're removed from it. It'll be there when you go back, but hopefully you'll be in better shape to deal with it, if there's anything that has to be dealt with. But the main thing is to cultivate this inner knowing of our true nature. Always be aware of that. Avoid this problem of self-forgetfulness. You know, in the Islamic tradition, one reason it is recommended that Muslims pray 5 times a day is to avoid this problem of self and God forgetfulness. If you do it 5 times a day, and you do it religiously or faithfully, 5 times a day you have an opportunity to remember your relationship with this larger reality. So if you don't meditate 5 times a day, at least once or twice a day is useful. Once a day for sure. Twice a day can be helpful. But then in time, you're always aware, you're inwardly aware of your essence and your relationship with the with this larger reality. It's just there all the time. And then and after a while, you can't think of any time in recent years when you weren't aware of it. That you're always there. It's always there. So that's where you want to be, always aware of your essence and your relationship with this larger reality. All the time. And thankfully, we don't have to dramatize a pious demeanor or try to impress others with our spirituality. We can others can just see us as being normal, intelligent, functional, okay people. But inside we're different. Inside we're different. Our consciousness is no longer modified and fragmented. Inside we know the truth about our essence and this larger reality.